CASAT Podcast Network.
We are excited to welcome Derek Reid here to the show today. Derek is the president and founder of the Nevada Peer Support Network. He's also the battalion chief with Truckee Meadows Fire and Rescue and has served in the fire and EMS industry for the last 25 years. Thanks so much for joining us today, Derek.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So as we get started, what experiences led you to establish the Nevada Peer Support Network?
That's a very good question. We had a suicide in our department in 2019, and we just stood up our peer support program, which was an integral part in kind of the recovery of that, even though that they were all affected as well. But they understood the concept of peer support. And we had other teams that were either establishing or were established to come and assist us with that postvention. Because of that, that event was very difficult in the sense that we didn't know who to reach out to. There were resources out there, we just didn't know who to call. We ended up calling the IFF, the International Association of Firefighters, more or less the union. They deployed a peer support team, and they came in and they hit every station and every person to sit down at the peer level and just say whatever bubbled up. Understanding that model, I started participating in that as well with the IFF. But I remember asking myself, I don't even know who to call. I was the lead of the peer support team. It was incumbent upon me to know most of the resources, and I didn't. So I mentioned that in one of our postvention deals, and I remember one of the guys from another department is like, pump the brakes on that. Well, I think it was a month later, Henderson had a suicide, and I remember calling down to him and saying, hey, if there's anything we can do to assist you, please let us know. And he said something on day 3. The tone in his voice and the words that he said were the exact same thing, and I felt it. And that was, I don't even know what our resources are. So at that moment, I scheduled the day. I sent maybe 15 emails out saying, we need to network. We need to find out who other department, what they have, and that includes law enforcement, EMS, firefighters, whatever scope that was, we'd figure that out. And we had a meeting, and it turned into 15 emails. It turned into about 90 people showing up, wanting to figure out how we can network and get all those resources together. And that concept was a website, and that's what you're seeing now with the Nevada Peer Support website that we have with the resources. So that's how that sparked that fire. And honestly, it's a brush fire going right now, even more so in the future. We have a vision, and we'll go until, everybody knows what's out there. Vetted resources, that is.
So you're a really new organization, and you mentioned you have a vision. What is your big vision for the Nevada Peer Support Network? So
501c3, December of 19, and our vision now is a resiliency center. We had, and that resiliency center is very comprehensive. It includes, inclusivity is one of our values, and we stick strongly to that. That means all law enforcement, all first responders, from the dispatcher being the first responder to the coroner being the last responder, and everybody in between. That's hospital professionals, that's and also military. This resiliency center, basically, if you can kind of take a walk with me in your mind, that it would be a larger facility where you had 2 large rooms, one that would be a classroom and potentially places that you can have classes like yoga, any kind of, physical or mental, we're talking, breathing exercise, meditation, any stress reducing exercise that could be of value to a first responder that is basically running redline. And certain times of the year, certain times of our timeline, each first responder branch has experienced something crazy over the last 2 years. It's either a movement that is anti-law enforcement. It's either a pandemic when you're talking hospital professionals. Last year's wildland season, I think all I can say, it was crazy. We lost equipment, and thank God we didn't lose manpower. We didn't have any line of duty deaths due to that event. In the military, frequently we go to war and stay at war, and those men and women that service the armed forces deploy and they come back, and it's no different. They see horrific things that no one should ever have to see. So that's one room, and then another room would be for support groups, debriefings, family marriage support groups. There's a lot of meat on the bone when it comes to that too. The support groups, IOPs, it can be, and then basically we would staff it with at least one or two administrative people up front. They'd walk through the door, they would meet somebody that was very culturally competent and also knowing of what the resources are. They would be, depending on the size of the resiliency center, at least 3 culturally competent trauma-informed clinicians on staff. That if anybody walked into the doors, they can do one-on-ones, they can do group, and they would be there for the first responders. And we would choose them, boots on the ground, not an administrative overarching agency or company. And so that's phase 1, and that would be like a commercial building. Phase 2 and 3 seems to be coming really fast because of the backing that we have with sponsorship. We may bypass phase 1 altogether. We might go right into phase 2 or 3, and that would be a campus. And you would see much more. You would have your gym, you would have everything I just mentioned, and then you would have branches and arms out. You would have an area to, a lot of health and wellness that surrounds first responders is knowing that you belong to a tribe. And that tribe is what strengthens us until we retire, and then you're not part of that tribe anymore. The center courtyard of this area could be walking paths, it can be water features. It could be a centralized area where there's a barbecue where we can come together and cohabitate, because that's what we're built for, is connection. That's a very brief synopsis of what the Resiliency Center was about. So I know I'm chewing up time, but there's a lot of meat on the bone of what our vision is, and it's currently happening right now.
That's so exciting, Derek. It's an incredible vision.
Yeah, I think obviously so needed. Most people, I think if you asked about, the struggles and especially around mental health and PTSD that first responders face, it seems pretty obvious that people know that that's something that first responders and their families deal with. But then if you ask about resources, like you said, I imagine it's hard to find those. And so I'm more curious about, with all these resources, do you know who's kind of accessing these resources? Is it a lot of first responders themselves? Is it family members, or kind of all around?
So to go back to the resource pool, the Nevada Peer Support Network resource pool is deep, but it's also stratified, diversified. We made sure that there were everything from your basic peer supporter that's trained but is boots on the ground, which is an amazing, trusting kind of someone there to open the door to the other resources. You have chaplains for spiritual wellness. You have licensed clinicians that are culturally competent, trauma-informed, that we vet, we talk to, we know them, we know what their specialties are. We even know who to send somebody that might be a little new agey versus maybe, this person's a little redneck. We need to find them somebody a little bit more conservative. So we choose these resources on purpose, and, we do that very carefully, but it is very encompassing and very broad. And still, even then, not one counselor is a one size fits all. It's a relationship, and we guide those participants that reach out for help and say, hey, you know what? Don't be disappointed if you run into your first clinician and it's a mess. that you get 3 strikes. Swing. If it's a miss, we'll find you somebody else, but don't give up. And that's where that peer support comes in and tries to. So the data, I think you're kind of referring to data. How do we know that it's effective? What's our measurement? What's our measuring stick to know that if we're actually doing good? We get a lot of feedback. We get a lot of people that actually, when we first started, was somewhat awkward, because when we started peer support and explained the intent of what peer support is and the why, and this is what we do, and there's confidentiality, there's NRSs that protect that. I remember standing in a bar one time, and this guy's standing next to me that I work with, and he's not really saying anything, but it's a guy that I don't normally talk to, and he was just kind of oddly quiet. And about 5 minutes came back, and then he dropped the question, "Hey, I started seeing a counselor." And I'm like, "Really? Awesome." And then we started talking, normalizing stuff that we would never talk about, maybe even 6-7 years ago. So the normalization, the reduction of stigma, which is noted as the biggest thing that stops somebody from getting help. To answer a little bit more of your question, clinicians. I've talked to clinicians. They said, "I can't tell you, but I can tell you what you have done is you've already saved lives." But we can't quantify that because of the confidentiality thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I love that you hit that point, because that was one of the thoughts I had, is by this kind of being birthed out of your need for resources. Because the thing about whether it's addiction or mental health, or counseling through someone who's experienced death by suicide, like, you don't know what you need until you need it, right? And so I love that it birthed out of that place of, like, I don't know what resources, but I think that benefit of getting out and telling people about the resources, now it normalizes it's okay to experience these things. In fact, it's probably more typical to experience some of the mental health struggles as a first responder than maybe not. And so, and I liked your 3 strikes analogy, because I've always heard it as a negative, and it's the first time you said it, where you said you get 3 strikes, like, don't walk out after your first strike, like, try again, right? And I love that piece, and normalizing it, and I think that's such a great thing that you're doing.
Yeah, and then you get 3 outs too. So we don't say 3 strikes and go ahead and give up, hit the bottle again. We're like, "Oh, wait a minute, you get 2 more outs." There's always something around the corner that we're not going to give up on people. So.
Derek, for anyone who doesn't know about peer support, can you describe for us what a peer does, what the training's like? How do you even get involved in being a peer?
I'm glad you asked that. We have people in the state that belong to departments that still don't understand the difference between CISM and peer support. CISM is more of a response model. When something bad happens, we call on the CISM team, we sit around in a circle, we have this 13-point structured way that we're going to work our way around the room and talk. That's been, even at the beginning of my career, 25 years ago, I've been involved in those, and I don't necessarily like them. Peer support, it's more proactive. It's more, hey, let's identify the problem before it becomes a problem. Let's have difficult conversations. And then if somebody does reach out or you're acting as a peer support, you're doing more listening than you are injecting solutions. And I'll tell you what, for a first responder, when I was down in LA, when I went to paramedic school, I had 1 minute to tell my preceptor what was wrong with this patient and what are you going to do for them. 1 minute. So we've been trained our whole careers to solve the problem and solve it quick. Peer support, completely flipped upside down. It is let them talk, let those silent, those little pauses in conversation float. They're processing and teaching peer supporters that, sometimes just listening or a cup of coffee, solves so many problems just because you're helping and allowing them that space to verbalize what's on their mind, to get it out. And sometimes most of the times they come up with their own solutions. From a clinical standpoint, I don't know any counselor, good ones, that give you all the answers. It's a process. Those answers are embedded within you, not somebody that's, getting paid to give you answers. So that's helpful. And then after listening, okay, what you're saying is this. We call it reflective listening, mirroring, all the strategies of almost like negotiations, if you will, just to try to find out, or at least lead that person to what is bothering you the most today. Yeah, you have all these issues, but what led to it? Oh, you're doing this. Is that helpful? How's that going for you? But you build that trust on the front end so you can ask these questions that might be otherwise intrusive. What peer support is not. It is not to enable a coworker to, just go to your room and sleep it off. No, that's not right, because they become now a danger to the rest of their crew. So that's enabling. That can actually be, a huge risk to themselves and also to their crews. So we don't look at it that way. We look at it as, hey, we'll help you, we'll listen to you, we'll walk with you through the darkness, we'll walk you to who we feel that it would be a relevant, warm handoff, a counselor. You have questions about spirituality, we'll get you a chaplain. You're completely falling off the wagon and wheels are coming off. There's treatment centers, and we've done it. I've flown across the country with a member once, and I had 2 hours notice. I had stuff to do that day, but that member became the priority at that time. I jumped on the plane, flew to Maryland with that employee, and then flew back the very next morning. I think I was on the plane, it seemed like 2 days straight. I don't know.
Right. So I got a question, because I love that. So I love the specifics of how this works within first responders, because you think of peers and you keep saying like the terms boots on the ground and folks that get it. And I think there's a difference to, a lot of times we talk about peer support and we talk about specific issues, so an addiction or substance use disorder recovery. But I think there's such an importance of people who get what it's like to be a first responder and the experiences. So where do you get the folks that become the peers? Are they active as first responders, or are these folks that are retired? Like how does that path kind of work?
All the above. To be relevant to the first 25% of the department that's been hired in the last 5 years, you need people that went through the academy with them, understood how difficult that was, went through probation, knowing what it is to clean toilets, twice a day or whatever. And you need those mid-level guys that are in the heyday of their career, but some stuff at home isn't going really well and they're struggling. The ones that are approaching retirement, questioning their purpose, not knowing what to do, engaging in work to the point to where it's unhealthy because that's all they know, extending their retirement, because the statistics of firefighters in particular, survival rate post-retirement is not good. For whatever reason, it's either cancer or they fall into the bottle, they lose their sense of purpose, they lose their tribe. We need those people on the other side also to pull them through that tunnel of, hey, I know what it felt like when I retired and I had to find a hobby. Fishing and hunting, you can only do so much. You got to find some other purpose in life. And that's where depression sets in. If you don't have a sense of purpose, you get depressed, and then suicide's on the menu.
Derek, you mentioned that the last 2 years really have been just a tremendous amount of added stress to just even a stressful job, just with the events that have happened over the last couple of years. I'm curious, what do you see as the biggest need for first responders and frontline workers today?
Well, that's an interesting question, because the first part of that question is, yes, it has been stressful. Second part is the problems are the same as they were before we even came into a pandemic. We still have people that are struggling with, you know, this is almost, I've said this so many times, it seems like we're saying it again, and that's that suicide has outpaced line of duty deaths for at least the last 6 years, and we don't even have all that data. So you know what that means is we're more dangerous to ourselves than our jobs that are very dynamic and high risk. That's crazy. What are the reasons? There is one person that has collected that data as much as he possibly could. He made it his mission in life. And it turns out that family and relationships float to the top of that completed suicide or that death by suicide ranking. It's not PTSD, it's family relations, and that has a lot to do with what you said at the very beginning, and that's that reintegration process. You go to work and you're in an honor society. You come back home, you're in a pride society. You get treated different when you've got your cape on and your armor, whether you're carrying a gun or wearing turnouts. People, for the most part, respect us and see us as heroes. When we come home, we're just mom, dad, or the significant other. That transition is not as easy as it seems. It's hard for a lot of people. There's a lot of meat on that bone, but I'm not. Trust me, there's a lot of other things that lead to that kind of stuff. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's really what our has been the common thread and the focus of this podcast is supporting families of first responders, and communication and strong relationships continues to raise to the top as being most important. And so I'm curious, what do you see as the biggest need for families?
The need, so integration within kind of, there's even a lot of leadership books out there that will tell you that, to make a stronger organization is to kind of overlap the family into that a little bit. Our department, after our suicide, we were told that we had 100 or a 10%, or we were 10 times more likely to have a secondary suicide because we had one. So we went to work. We had family, we had a counselor come in and do a wives group where we had, I believe, 20 wives that came in, which was pretty significant, and talked about the warrior culture to kind of loop the wives into this is what they do, and this is what their day looks like. They might not come home and want to tell you everything that they saw, like we talked about vicarious trauma. Or maybe I just spoke to a dispatcher the other day, and he said that he grew up in a first responder family. The mom and dad used to sit around the table and talk about all the nasty things they saw. But they were offloading. That's a healthy thing. But when we go home, this particular dispatcher was married to somebody that didn't like those stories. So guess who he has to offload his stuff? Nobody. And he's a dispatcher. So a lot of his stories never get completed. That loop is never tied in most of the time. If they hear a baby is not breathing, and first responders arrive on scene and then dispatch hangs up, he doesn't know what the result of that was. It could have been a seizure, could have been mom freaking out because she thought he couldn't breathe. But in his mind, he's thinking, wow, I had a dead kid today. This is crazy. And processing that without getting feedback. We did a couples deal where we brought in a chaplain, and he gave us, he did a really good job. He took tables, you put tablecloths and candles up and candy in the middle, and he scheduled it at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon to where spouses would, come off work, they'd come down, they'd go over the 4 pillars of resiliency, and then gave them time afterwards to go and have dinner to try to reintegrate the family in that sense. A lot of the things that you're going to see at Valor on the 20th and 21st is warrior culture, the honor versus pride culture, the reintegration rituals that warriors of ancient times used to do. We don't do what they actually did a better job in reintegrating into the family than we did, which made a stronger family unit. And Josh and Philip are going to talk about that. Philip from Valor, he's actually an anthropologist, and some of his stories that I've heard on podcasts, even these small little villages in South America do it better than we do. We were never taught in our schooling, even when I went to school all the way up to modern day, there's nothing in there that talks about how to build your own resilience, maintain your mental wellness, and know what to do when you get off track. When you XYZ and go, I'm off track. They don't even tell you how to identify that within yourself. Josh Wenner from Valerie does a retreat, and he talks about those action signals and what to do when you see those action signals. Managing your sympathetic nervous system. There's practices out there. If you can't breathe or you're breathing shallow, there's tools for this. But first responders were never taught this. And then if they're not taught right, they're going to reject it because that's touchy-feely. So it has to be framed right. One thing that I've said in all the lectures that I've given for peer support is the best thing you can do with peer support when you bring it to your organization is don't make it weird. You make it weird, they're rejected. It's not about giving out hugs. If what I'm telling you, don't make it weird.
I love that. But you bring up such a good point too, and I think we've seen like Heather said over and over, where families talk about all the logistics that go into managing a first responder home, to sleep schedules and all of that. But the thing that's more nuanced and difficult is communicating what to talk about, when to talk about, how to talk about it, and when to there. And that may vary. There's times that you want to talk and you don't want to talk, and so that kind of emotional mental health piece is something that is really hard to navigate. And I love that this has turned from not just resources. So when I saw this on the agenda, I thought we were just going to talk about a resource website. And so that's why I'm like blown away, because I love that even though it's resources and connecting people to resources, it's normalizing kind of taking care of your whole self. But also I think, and I love how you're talking about this, it's really supporting the whole family, right? And supporting not just the individual that's the first responder, but the whole family, because that's going to make everybody better. And it I believe, and not to be too over dramatic, maybe I am being a little bit, but I think that ripples out to our community. I really do. And hopefully that normalization that we're seeing with our first responders that you're doing it will ripple out to our community in some other ways.
I'm glad you captured that last point, because I was going to follow up with that, but you nailed it. And if we're more mentally in our game when we're at work, that is gonna ripple to the community. Our end user will get the best of who we are, and they'll get the human side of who we are. And when we go home, when we learn what those rituals are, whether it's I can't remember which culture, but some warriors weren't even allowed back in the tribe until they did something to reintegrate. And that in some cultures, it was writing calligraphy. Some it had to do with, making something that it was a completely different thing. So what it did is it got them out of who they were, got them back into who they are. So they don't come back the warrior, they come back and there's that intermediate area where they get reconnected to who they are. And then that makes them a more effective dad. The dog doesn't get kicked and the wife is happy. So this is why we're bringing in Valor and the Resiliency Center and Valor. This is all wellness stuff. This isn't sickness stuff. This is reframing what we haven't done right, the result of that, and putting wellness on the front end and teaching people what they should have been knowing all along. And that's take care of your brother and sister, meaning our coworkers, and know when they are offline by knowing them in the first place and building trust on the front end. Knowing yourself and when you're offline and getting yourself doing something, whether that's playing the guitar, going to the gym, There are many ways to get back online, but nobody knows that. No one taught them that.
I talk a lot on campus about mental health, and one of the things we've been talking a lot about is masculinity and mental health, and in these cultures. And you're mentioning things like warrior, and we know from our history. My brother's is in the military now, and we talk a lot about he has a real frustration and a soft heart for Vietnam vets, and he has this thing where every time he sees somebody that's wearing a Vietnam hat or something, I think we've talked about on this too, he says, "Thank you for your service." And one of the things he says is we when they came home, we didn't celebrate them. And so there's research that shows the reason that drug use was high was not because of drug use in combat, it was because of the lack of acceptance and reintegration. And I think seeing that on a micro level, on a regular kind of daily level, every other day, every 48 hours or 96 hours, whatever the shift is, I think it's so important to talk about that reintegration and how that works for ritualistically for the family and the person. And then also normalizing it's okay in these really kind of masculine cultures to use, like you said, don't make it weird. Use these warrior talk, but also it normalizes these things that don't always go hand in hand with that kind of masculine culture. Does that make sense? I'm astounded at what you're doing at the program, and completely on board 100%. I love what everything you have going on here.
Well, I appreciate it. And you nailed it. And we got to get out of the habit of asking our brothers and sisters, how you doing? Because you know what the common response is to that, right?
Fine.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Good. I'm good. Rather than that call sucked and then leave some silence in between, or wow, I don't even know what to do with that. I've never seen anything like that before. And being safe, to make it a safe place to be vulnerable, to say, hey, wow, that hit my top 5. And sometimes it's not even the trauma. Sometimes I had somebody tell me one time that scene was so messed up, it didn't bother me because it didn't seem real. That would be like a decapitation or something horrendous where you just go, well, that's not real. And that's not the traumatizing thing. The traumatizing thing is seeing some kid that broke his leg screaming, trying, because he's in so much pain. And you have a child at home the same age, same hair color. That's what, puts us into a state of anxiety when we go home and our kid gets up on the couch and get down from there, and it's real. It hits home.
Mm-hmm. And people are more likely to check in on the really traumatizing ones without really knowing the ones that hit home. And so normalizing that culture, I think of what you're about how to check in and then also communicate. It sounds like you're saying communicate when it's difficult for us, and normalizing that I think is so important.
Yeah, and looking at vulnerability as a strength and not a weakness. We need to keep preaching that. It's like, hey, what's going to affect you isn't going to affect me. Fair enough. But if that bothers you, let's get it out on the table. Let's talk about it. How'd you sleep last night? What are you doing this weekend? These are questions that are living ideations, not suicidal ideation. So if they're living, then they're probably doing pretty well. It's an opener. It's not necessarily deep conversation. But if you got a birthday coming up and you ask that person, hey, what are you doing for your birthday? I'm just gonna stay at home. That may not be normal. It's isolation, and that's not usually a good sign. Only one sign, but still worth investigating, right?
That's good. Changing the culture more than sounds like as much as everything else. The culture of checking in and looking for those things. I love it. Absolutely love it.
Don't make it weird. Make it sound manly. And
there you go.
We do have females in our occupation, but some of the females, I actually talked to a female within my service branch that said that they felt that they had to be tougher because they were a female, that they did know that people looked at them as being more sensitive, which made them even combat something that would mess up even the most masculine person, man or woman, because they felt that they had an expectation from their coworkers. And that would confirm a bias of some kind. So that makes, women in certain service branches even harder for them to be vulnerable.
That totally makes sense. Well, all I know is you have me on board. So whatever you need, I'm on board. Let me know. I love what you're doing for our community, for our state. Love any can we put in, just for the podcast too, just the website is kind of one last final thing, and anything else you want to add?
Nope. So the website is www.nvpsn.org, and like I said, you can find tons of resources there. It takes a little. There's grief resources, there's resiliency grief resources, there's family, marriage resources, spiritual. It's somewhat of a deep dive. Peer support is very prominent on there. You go to peer support, and depending on what service branch you want, those peer support teams are established. Some of them are in development. COVID slowed us down for the training of that. Yeah.
That's awesome. And we'll have that in the notes as well, and in the podcast notes, the show notes. But thank you so much, Derek, for everything you're doing, and for being on this today, and hopefully people get some good connection and some resources out of this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Derek. And I want to echo what Daniel said. I'm on board, and let me know how I can help as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Absolutely. And thank you for allowing me this platform to be able to spread that, peer support doesn't have to be weird, and come to Valor.
I love it.
Yeah. And I would be happy to send you those flyers to send out there. We're looking over 200 people so far, and I expect that to grow when we get closer. So there is 2 days. So you guys are welcome to attend either day or both days.
Thanks, Derek. Awesome. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to CASAT Conversations. We value and appreciate your time. Please share with us any comments, feedback, and ideas you have for future episodes. Please email us at learning@casat.org. Please visit our webpage for additional information, show notes, and relevant topics at casatondemand.org/CASAT Conversations.
This podcast has been brought to you by the CASAT Podcast Network, located within the Center for the Application of Substance Abuse Technologies at the University of Nevada, Reno. For more podcasts, information, and resources, visit casat.org.